Okay, so welcome to session 3 of the NFUO's Cultivating Best Human Resource Practices. It's nice to see some familiar names and faces and returning folks today, and some new names and faces. This session is on interpersonal dynamics, training, and retention, and we've got a very exciting lineup of speakers today. And it will be taking place in 2 parts. So this one, we will have the first half and then have a short break, followed by the second half put on by Many Waves Collective. I want to say on the onset that we are very thankful for the funding through the Employment Ontario project, which is funded in part by the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario. Without that funding, this project would not be possible, which also leads me to say that we have an incredible suite of resources available for all of our participants, whether you are joining us just for this session or for have been to the previous sessions. We can share all of those resources with you if you fill out the short form that is linked to the email invite that you all received. I really encourage you to fill that out. It helps us be compliant with our funders and ensure that we can hopefully offer this again in subsequent years. It's okay if you are not an employer, you can still fill it out. You just need a CRA business number. If you don't have one of those and you'd still like to receive the paperwork, I encourage you to send me an email. Again, you can just reply to the email you received for the invite for this evening, and we can talk through it so that you can receive those resources. I don't want anyone to not feel like they're able to take advantage of them. Okay, so I think that is all for my end for introductions for now. So I'm going to pass it over to Lara to introduce the first half of today's session. Over to you, Lara.
Thanks, Dave. I think this is going to be a really great session, and I'm really grateful to be the one that gets to introduce our speakers for tonight. So first joining us in the first part, we have Marcelle Paulin. Marcelle owns and runs Sleepy G Farm along with her spouse, Brendan Grant. The farm is located outside Thunder Bay, Ontario, just a few kilometers from Lake Superior. The farm was founded in 2010 and produces certified organic vegetables, eggs, and beef from a herd of shorthorn cattle. Marcelle is responsible for administration, hiring, supervision, and task delegation of Sleepy G's staff, which ranges from 3 to 7 team members depending on the time of year. Also joining us is Isaac Crosby, also known as Brother Nature. Isaac is an Ojibwa Black agricultural expert with a passion for teaching and sharing his knowledge of Indigenous food systems. Isaac is part of a large family from the Ojibwa of Anderdon, a pre-Confederation band of mixed Ojibwa Black people living near Windsor, Ontario. Isaac learned to farm and grow food with his grandparents and community, and has also formally trained in landscape agriculture. Isaac's work can be found across Takaranto, where he has planted many Indigenous gardens and gardening projects, both private and public. So thank you, Marcelle and Isaac, for joining us. And like Dave said, I'll wait to introduce our other speakers, Paul and Heather, until the start of their presentation later on. So with that, I'll hand it over to Isaac.
Woohoo! All right, well, thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have some fun tonight. So I'm doing the first, well, slide number 2, apparently, which is going to be fun. So it's about employer leadership in establishing, is that slide up? Awesome. Employer leadership in establishing workplace culture. So within this slide, you'll see that the workplace culture is important for your experience, customer experience, your reputation, and your staff, right? How you carry yourself at work and your working style sets a tone for your workplace and culture. And be intentional about your self-awareness to build the foundation of your practices. When I look at all of those, and I think about what we do at Crosby Gitigaan, the farm that I'm with, or wherever I'm working, for me, because I'm always the lead, I'm the main farmer there, I got to make sure that, for me, my attitude is in check. Because if I come there with a bad attitude, I could pass that on to my workers or to my work students. And I don't like that. So I make sure that I have my attitude in check, my emotions in check. So just in case I need to speak to them or they need to speak to me about something, right? So I make sure that I keep it nice and calm. There's days, you might want to flare up and kind of scream and stuff like that, but kind of keep it kind of calm and come to it like how do I say that? Come to it like a boss, a really good boss, someone that knows how to talk to people. And when it comes to your self-awareness, be aware of what you do and how you talk to your staff. Because sometimes you can be snippy to staff and not know it until your staff tells you, "Oh, you're a little bit rude to me." So keep your self-awareness. And part of your self-awareness is, as I joking earlier, sometimes your self-awareness is making sure you look good when you go to work before you start your farming. You're all nice and clean. So you pop your collar, look kind of good. You know, by the end of the day, you're gonna be dirty and muddy, right? But through that whole day, you can keep a nice light attitude. Sometimes it's hard, but it can be done. They do it all the time. And if your farm, if your workplace is nice and happy and it's open, your workplace culture, your employees, your staff, and the community around you will see it, and they will love that. Stay open, stay grounded, and love your plants. Next slide, please.
Can I add a little thing there?
You sure can.
Yeah. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the power dynamic point at the very bottom, which to me is really important because, myself and my spouse, the co-owner of the farm that we run, we are the bosses and we do hold all of the power, or at least that's how it's perceived. And so we want to be able to empower the workers to be able to obviously do the work, represent the farm as part of our team, as part of our community. But we also don't want to, we have to recognize that our impact on them is different than their impact on us as the employees. So, we hold the power balance in the sense of we write the checks, we assign the tasks, we have the power to hire and fire. The employee doesn't have any of those powers. So it's really important to understand that, it's not an equal relationship, even though, we might practice a lot of things like communication and, different roles on the farm that make it seem like we're all in this together and we're all doing the same thing, but we're not all starting off on the same level playing field. So in terms of that, just recognizing that, and that, it might not be as easy for folks to speak up because they're afraid to lose their job or to lose their seniority or to have lost something within that relationship. So just to meet people where they're at and try to just recognize it and work to sort of even the balance, or at least recognize that, that the employee doesn't have the same sort of role in the business as the owner does, or as the boss does.
Good point.
We can move on to the next slide.
All right, so the next slide is orientation procedures pre-season. So in this slide, it says, well, share relatable resources that you use on your farm. Preparation influences your approach to the entire season. Don't hire hopefully, hire realistically. That's a good one. Hire based on your labor budget. That's a really good one. So let's go look at the first one. Share relatable resources that you use on your farm. To me, that is ideal. That is something that sometimes I say is a no-brainer. Because if you want your farm, if you want your workers to enjoy the season and to do what you do, you've got to share your my mouth is going slow, my brain is going fast. You have to share your resources. Sometimes there was actually one farm I actually worked on where the person didn't want to share their resources. They held everything to themselves and just divvy it out. Me, I'm like, okay, I'll give you half of it right now. We'll go through this half, and then later on, we'll go through the next half, right? But I'm always sharing, because I find that if you hold everything together, it just stays there. If you share it, it goes out and comes back to you even more. Your preparation, your influences, your approach the entire season. Oof, what can I say about that one? There's been times with my work students, if I'm there preparing, sometimes things don't work out. I'm like, man, did I really screw that up? No, I don't think I did, but I go back and I redo it again and make sure I'm prepared. Don't hire, hopefully hire realistically. Oof, I did that once. I hired hopefully once. I hired, yeah, I know and I hope this person turns out. Come to find out they lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And I thought, man, because there's another person I wanted to hire that I was like, you know what? I really like this person. But they don't want to start for like another 2 weeks. I'm like, man, I really want you, but you know what? I hope this person turns out. I won't be able to see this other person. Great. When it comes to hire on your labor budget, you don't want to go over that at all. I've seen that happen on some farms, and it always ends up to a sticky mess. I'm kind of lucky when I'm working with the University of Farm students. They take care of all of that. They take care of all the big budget, and I just walk in and do what I got to do. But sometimes I hear over budget, over under stuff like that. I'm like, oh, I wonder why. Right? Did you not know what you really needed? Did you not know how to hire based on your budget? Which is fine. I mean, it's something that we all learn, something that just happened. But we got to keep in mind that if you hire over your budget, where does your money go, and who's getting it, right? And what happens to your farm after that for the next season if you don't really have a big budget? Marcelle, you have something to say? You want to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, part of that when you talk about hire realistically and not hopefully, that's a really tough one because you can't know, beyond an interview and really beyond a reference, you can't really know how things are going to turn out. You don't know people's personality, you don't know their work ethic, you don't know their habits, you don't know their background, previous experience in terms of their background. So that's really tough. And that to us has been a pitfall a few times, although it's also been a gift a few times where you think, where is this going to go? And they end up being a great employee and a great team member. And so it's always a roll of the dice when you select candidates for interview, and then when you offer a job to them, you never really know what you're going to get until you really start rolling, and that's the exciting part about being a boss. One of the exciting parts, anyway. But staff are expensive, and so at our farm, it's our biggest expense item. More than anything else is staff and labor. It's about 30 to 35% of our budget is staff. And that's one big line item. Yeah, so you want to choose carefully, and then you also want to invest in folks that seem promising and to try and keep them. And that's sort of the retention part. But in terms of orientation and preseason, there's not a lot that we do on our farm prior to, let's say, the first day. Now, during the pandemic, we had almost all new staff, so we had a bit of an online meeting because we were all in different places before we started the work for the season, and that was actually kind of fun. And we haven't done it since. It was more of like a 2021 kind of activity. So we met on Zoom and got to know each other. There was not a lot of people knew each other in the group, and that was kind of fun. And really, for a lot of folks, they were used to meeting online at that point. It had been over a year. So it was a great way to meet people. It wasn't super intimidating. Nobody was there in person. Nobody could see, like what they were wearing, or, there was, it broke down some barriers, and it was a comfortable place to meet. And that was really neat. So we did a lot of, maybe not orientation, but getting to know each other, team building, just, through an hour or two meeting online ahead of meeting in person, which was really cool. In terms of this slide, we didn't talk a lot about strength training or physical mental health strategies, but we did talk about sort of what to expect, when we start, things to folks might want to get, water bottle, stuff for the field, that type of thing. And yeah, and I guess that was it. And then otherwise, we just kind of head into the first day. Currently, when I hire somebody, I send them an email, and it talks about what to expect on the first day, and what time to be there, what your work days are, that type of thing. So there is that. I do share that, but I don't have a specific employee handbook that I share. Anything else, Isaac? Should we move on?
I think we should move on.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess that kind of leads right into the onboarding and sharing of expectations of employees and employers. And as it says here in the slide, it talks about a detailed contract, and that's something that we do on our farm. So I write a contract for each of the team members. I even write a contract for folks that are like returning or still working. I have staff that work in the wintertime too. So I've got folks that are just going to roll right into the new season, which kind of starts around the 1st of May where we are. That's when new folks come and join the experienced folks. And so I even write contracts for them that talk about any changes with pay, with sick days, with holidays, with any of the terms that we've discussed or that we've got in place. We also in the contract have roles, things that are specific to each individual. And some folks don't have necessarily specific roles, but we can talk about duties. I talk about duties a little bit in there, but mostly like, for folks that are doing specific roles like, managing areas, managing people, that type of thing. So I lay that all out. And then, I have people sign them. And of course, they get a copy and I get a copy so that if things do come up, around some of the terms that we've discussed or that have been agreed to, then we've got written details on that. And that kind of keeps ambiguity out of the situation. So, so everything is very clear, transparent, and we can rely on that. So onboarding for us actually starts at the interview. So that's when we talk about, work hours. We talk about, those terms that I discussed, sort of what to expect, what the expectations are around the work, days of the week, that type of thing. Because some folks have a different idea about what a full-time job looks like, for example, or a part-time job, how many hours that is, what time of day that is, what the flexibility is. So we're just really specific about what that's going to look like. And if there is flexibility, talking about where that flexibility is within the schedule or within the hours, because a lot of folks like to know that, or a lot of folks are juggling more than one job too. So that's really important. And then so that's where the onboarding actually starts, is just in the interview, just sharing the information, because maybe that person says, this isn't going to work for me. Great. Then we can move on to the next person, if that's not going to work. And that automatically just is like, great, this is, or it isn't going to work. It sort of checks those boxes. And then in terms of onboarding, we often have a trial day. And that's usually a paid trial day. It is always a paid trial day. I'll have folks come out and they can try the work for the day to see if they like it. And that's, in the wintertime, in the summertime, like if I'm hiring people on anytime, I'll bring them out for a trial day and they can just get in with me or whoever else is working and try it out for a half day or a day that's paid to see if they like the work, which is really interesting. Because they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. And again, you don't want to hire somebody and them not want to be there either. So it just really works that we're all kind of, checking each other out. Is this going to work? Do we like that person's style? How do they mesh with other team members? Maybe they already know the other team members. There's all kinds of things. So that trial day for me is really interesting. And it's sort of like a hit the ground kind of running sort of interview. And then after that point, then they can, sort of think about, reflect on the day. I can check back in with them by email usually is what I do. And, how did it go? What did you think? I think, and I'll give some feedback. I think you did really great with this. What do you think about, ask any questions? And then if it makes sense, I'll offer a job. And with the written offer, which will be by email, it will dictate, how much, to get paid, any benefits, start time, days, that type of thing, and then ask for feedback on that. Will that work for you? Because there's no point in offering somebody a job where it's not going to work for them. So, I think maybe not, but for us anyway, gone are the days where it's like, this is the job, take it or leave it. It's more like, we've got this job. What kind of days are you available? What's that going to look like? And we sort of negotiate what, especially for experienced people, but even for new folks, how do we get people on the farm? This is a hard enough job to get, in the sense of like, we're in a remote location. We've got all these kind of barriers to employment being rural, and the nature of the work, which is really physical, that we want to make other parts of the work more accessible, because our work is already kind of inaccessible. And then finally, in terms of onboarding, we have an orientation day. That's the very first day of work, where everyone who works here, including sometimes my son, who doesn't work here because he's 6, but he's sometimes there too, takes part in an orientation day that we discuss, numerous things, expectations. We discuss goals for us and for the worker, what personal goals they might have and what goals we have for the farm. We talk about roles, what my roles are, what my spouse's roles are, what all the roles are for all of the returning individuals, and who does what. So anyone who's new knows who does what, or anybody's roles that's changing, who does what. And then the expectations around like start time. One major expectation we talk to people about is that you don't have to be the best, because there's lots of people who are really good at this work, and then some people who are less good at the work, but you always have to try your best. And that's sort of the theme that we put out there. We used to this used to be a farm that there was a lot of pressure to like really perform. It's production-based work, so we get paid by the piece. At least I do. I don't get paid by the hour. So there was a bit of pressure there, and we've sort of drawn back from that, because we found that it was stressful for people and it was stressful for us too. So now we say, you don't have to be the best, you just have to try your best. And that's kind of like an ongoing mantra or theme on the farm, is that we're always just trying our best. And like, yeah, some people aren't that good, but at least if they're trying their best and they've got a lot of heart, that means something. And you can't fault them for that. So anyway, we talk about that. And, we talk about respect. Respect for each other, respect for animals, tools, plants on the farm. We've just talked about policies, that type of thing. So that's kind of there's lots of detail in the expectations, and that actually is quite a big section of our orientation day, but that's really important, because when people know about what your expectations are, then they can try to meet them. But if they don't know what the expectation is, then you never really know if you're succeeding or failing or meeting the benchmarks. So just really important to describe what that looks like. And then we talk about work-specific expectations, but I don't need to go into those details on this.
A couple questions in the chat, if you guys want to address them. The first one would be, any tips for trial work days that happen in the winter for summer positions? And then the second one is, do you do a probationary period with new hires? If either of you have anything to add to that.
I'll talk about the winter versus summer. Yeah, so we have winter work going on right now, where we're doing a lot of like bagging for retail and prepping for we run a CSA too. We've also got like farm chores that we do, feeding animals and doing stuff like that. But really, work for us anyway, labor is labor. And if you are able to, bag carrots and, shovel manure, like if you're able, work is kind of work. If we look for people that are, competent workers who are, who pay attention, who follow instruction, who are able to communicate with, because that's a big part of working in a team. So, I bring people on and get them doing whatever we're doing, and that actually translates well to all the work that we do here on the farm. It's not super task specific, but it's just work specific. And I'm not necessarily hiring somebody because they're fast at weeding. I'm just hiring somebody because they're they're capable of first of all showing up, performing work, communicating, and following instruction.
Right. So for me, our winter work will actually be in a greenhouse at the Scarborough farm. So doing a little bit of work there. When it comes to probation period, we don't have a probation period for our work students, for any of our students at all, our workers. When you're hired on with me, you're hired on. And when it comes, like, I want to speak back to the whole conflict arises sort of thing. When you're hired on with me, you get a book and a pen, one book and one pen. And in that book and pen, I will tell them, I need you to write down if I'm giving you any suggestions, if you have any questions, what your roles are, what your duties are. I need you to write that down in this book. And everything, if I give you tips on how to grow things, how to do anything, write it down in the book. So that at the end of the whole program, when you're done working with me, you have this book of all these questions and answers for you, right? If any conflict arises, when it comes to conflict, woo-wee, I try to nip that stuff in the bud as soon as I hear it. I've had some times where I had workers who just didn't work well together at all. And I had to separate them, had to figure out what's going on here, and then figured out, okay, you're having a problem here, you're having a problem there. So how can we work this out? And we sort of work it out. At the same time, I have them at the different parts of the farm, different parts of the garden, until they calm down, until they find a resolution within themselves. So I always tell them, I'm not really your parent here. I want to guide you along. Really want to guide you along and be happy within this farm, within the garden. So I need you to somehow help me with your own conflict resolution, right? But within that book and the pen and paper, they write everything down. It almost becomes like their diary for them, which is great because it allows them to get stuff out of their head and onto paper. So that when it's out of their head onto paper, they have a better work day. When it's stuck in their head, their whole work day is done because they're so focused on, I had a problem with that person. I'm like, no, put it on paper, walk away from it, we'll get back to it at the end of the day, right? Like I said, no probation period for us. When you're on, you're on, and I love it because people stay. They love the fact that, okay, there's no probation. I can say, yeah, as long as you show me that you're willing to keep doing this work and doing it to the best of your ability, hey, you're here with me. If you kind of falter, because we all falter at one point in time, me being who I am, I'll pick you back up and say, hey, you sort of did this, this, and this. Is anything going on? Are you having a bad day? If you are, do you want to go somewhere and talk about it, or do you want to sit down? You need a break? If not, okay, let's go on with our day. Let's have some fun because we are in nature. We're outside. We're not stuck under those fluorescent lights or LED lights. We're in nature. And when you come to nature, you gotta let your attitude go. Especially because I tell people, when you have bad energy and you're touching my fruit and you're touching the plants, stuff like that, that energy goes into those fruits and veggies. And you might bite into it and be like, yuck, it tastes horrible, but it might be a strawberry. I'm like, yeah, because your bad energy went into that. So you got to clear that stuff out of your head. Ground yourself. Got to take off your shoes, stand in that one spot, take your shoe off, take one shoe off, put your foot on the ground, and ground yourself. And then see what happens. Then you see that the plants are happier, and all of a sudden more birds come around you because you let go of all that negativity. That's what I always do. I ground those people. Take those shoes off. Let's see your feet. Put it on the ground. And also, what we do on my farm is that I have a medicine wheel garden I created. So when we start, every single time we go to the medicine wheel and we smudge and we talk. We give thanks, and then we go through what I expect for them of the day, and then we leave the wheel and we go about our day. I'm done.
Isaac, I love the idea of a work journal or work diary. That's a neat idea because I think that there's a lot of things that people want to say that maybe they don't get an opportunity to because it's busy, but I like it. Guys, in terms of probationary period, I put that in the contract that there's a 3-month probationary period. I've only had to use it maybe once or twice. Because sometimes things don't work out. And it's a long season. And, I do want to nip things in the bud, and it's not like one strike you're out, it's several strikes you're out. But yeah, I do want to nip things in the bud because before things go on for too long. So yeah. And like Dave said in the chat that probationary period up to 3 months. Onboarding there was one more thing I wanted to say. Whoops. The last thing I wanted to say about onboarding is I really like to sort of empower the staff and let them know that they're ambassadors to our farm and part of our farm family. We really are kind of a small knit group here. And likely if you run a small farm, that'll be kind of the same thing. You know, I live here, you know, some of our staff live here. We raise our family here. So they really are sort of part of the family, but also ambassadors of the farm to members of our CSA, to members of the community, to the public, to members of our small town and the village that we live in. You know, many people in our village know, like, oh, those people work at Sleepy G Farm, you know, so they know our staff, they get to know them, their mail comes, their mail, you know, like all kinds of things. So we like to say, you know, you're part of this farm, you're ambassador to the farm, you know, and we want you to feel like a part of that if possible. And then, you know, if they want to, it's up to them. They can describe the farm as their farm, or when they're speaking about, you know, the vegetables that we grow, use things like at our farm, we do this, you know, or at our farm, we produce that. And I say to my staff, you know, if you want to describe this farm when you work here as your farm, then that's great. We love that. And, you know, it creates a sense of belonging, and, you know, and that's true. It's part of their farm. It's the food that they produce, the food that we produce. So that's just sort of one way that I sort of try to give some of that, which they don't own the farm, I do, but I try to give some of that ownership over the things that we produce and what we do here to them. So we can move on to the next slide. Just looking at the time, we got about 10 minutes, hey? Okay. Training, techniques, expectations, and communication. I'm not going to read the slide. You can read that if you want to. I'm just going to head into the things that I wanted to talk about this. You know, I talked about that you don't have to be the best, you just have to try your best. And that's sort of a theme for training. And then when I bring people on, you know, sort of bigger picture and task related picture, I talk about what does success look like? You know, very specifically, you know, what does success look like when we are bunching beets, for example? Well, success looks like, you know, a nice bunch of beets with 4 beets in it, and the elastic's wrapped around 3 times, and they're boxed in boxes of 10, and, you know, and you're getting them into the truck, and you're going to be back here by, you know, whatever, 3 o'clock, whatever. You know, that's what success looks like. And so they have a very, very, very clear picture of that, you know, and then, you know, I can check in on that and say, how's it going? And they have an idea of whether it's going good or not, you know, because it's really easy to ask somebody, how's it going? But if they don't know what success looks like, they say, yeah, I think it's going really great, but they don't really know, you know, so you sort of give them a way to assess whether or not it's going good. And, you know, if it's not going that great, that's okay. Nobody's freaking out. It's just, okay, maybe I need to send some more resources over there if that's not going good. You know, it's not like you're losing. It's not like that person's doing a bad job. It's just, it's not going as expected. We can fix that. We can send more resources in or whatever. So I do that sort of on a bigger scale, like what does success look like for our farm, or what does success look like for that particular day? You know, by the end of the day, I want to have this done, you know, and we're going to all get there together, you know. That's kind of how I sort of deliver the expectations for the day, for the task, even for the season. And I think that people really appreciate that, because you can get a clear picture of what you know, what a good day is going to look like. So in terms of actual, you know, training, I often will have experienced people guide new people. I'll pair them together. And oftentimes, this is kind of a pro tip, is that like the least experienced person you already have on staff is the best person to train that next new person, because they're the newest person. And I found that they are often the ones that are the freshest, the ones that are more keen to sort of demonstrate the ways we do things on the farm, the ways that we operate as a team, the way that, you know, sort of like we like to see things done. And so I'll often pair that next newest person with the newest person, put them together instead of putting like the most experienced person with the newest person. So I find that often produces better results. And yeah, kind of some cohesion can happen there. Oh, you're new, I'm new, great, we're new. The way that I train people, and I sort of ask my staff if they're training somebody, is with a 3D method: describe, demonstrate, and do. So we describe what we're going to do before we even do it. I'll demonstrate it, or the person will demonstrate it, show them what to do, without them doing it, just take a look, and then have the person do the actual task while being observed. And I know this is like maybe seems obvious or whatever, but a lot of times it's like we don't actually take the time to like set in and actually like break down the task to like show somebody. They just kind of like, yeah, you just do this, cut this, wrap this, put over this over there, or like drop seeds and then just cover them up. But there's so much nuance to the things that we do here on like my vegetable farm anyway, that everything is very detailed. And like I said, they don't have to be the best at it, and they just have to try their best. But if you give them sort of the tools to do a really good job, then then they know that they can take the time to do it. So describe, the 3Ds are describe, demonstrate, and do. So you describe it, you demonstrate it, and then you have them do it. Then I let them do it, whatever it is we're doing, for 10, 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes if I forget what's going on. And then I'll come back. And whether I'm working on the same task as them or whether I'm actually physically somewhere else, I'll come back and check in and say, how's it going? Take a look and make sure that what's happening is, where we want to be headed. I can offer a little bit of feedback, positive, constructive, whatever it is. Usually it's like a feedback sandwich, which is, constructive or positive, constructive, and then positive, and then encouraging, and we're off to the races again. So describe, demonstrate, and do, and then circle back. And that's really important, because the circle back part is just to make sure that, and I do this with experienced staff too, I circle back, make sure everything's going okay. Cause like things change, and sometimes you don't know how things are going to go. Finally, I'll just talk about our daily meetings, and we meet in the morning. We talk about the day, what the goal is. And I kind of talked about that before. What's the expectation? What's the goal for the day? What does success look like for today? We want to get this, and this done, and we want to be done by this time so we can all go home, or we're going to, meet after work. At the end of the day, we also meet, and we talked about, what the next day's goals are going to be. Because when you come to work in the morning, tired, you're crabby, you're whatever, it's nice to know what you're already going to do, so that the morning meeting, we don't have to go into too much detail. We don't have to talk for a super long time. We can kind of just get going with it. Plus, nobody likes to be blindsided. Nobody wants to show up and work and be like, oh, and by the way, we got to do this crappy ass job. And, you didn't know about it, and you didn't get a good night's sleep, and you didn't bring your rubber boots. So like, we talk about what's going to happen the next day, the day before, so that everybody in the morning kind of comes into it knowing roughly, I mean, things change, but roughly what's going to be going on. And we get into a bit of a rhythm that way. They're informal meetings. They're usually, first thing, just, outside the pack house, sort of a communal area where we have our trucks and our tools and everything. And that's a time also that, like, it's not just me telling what's going on, but like, people can tell me what's been going on with them, or what they need, or, if something's good, not good, whatever. And then once everybody kind of heads out to work, I sort of hang back, because not everyone likes to speak out in the group if we're meeting as a group. So I kind of hang back to see if anybody needs to talk to me privately. And like, I don't like center anybody out usually, but I'll kind of hang back and sort of just be around, A, in case somebody wants to talk to me privately, or B, if any problems seem to arise, which there's always problems. So, and then we also, in terms of communication, we carry radios. So like, I tell people, you just like, ask me, let me know whatever's going on. Ask for clarification. It's better to ask for clarification than it is to spend, an hour and a half doing something that you're not sure if is correct. So I'd rather be asked a million times rather than, waste time on something that is incorrect. Isaac.
Very well, thank you. So for me, like I said earlier, it's the book and the pen. Because I always remember my grandfather always told me, sure, you can have a piece of paper, but if you write it down, you're going to remember a lot more. That piece of paper always disappears somewhere. So I always tell people, okay, here's a book and a pen. Some people hate it. I'm not going to lie to you. Some people actually hate it. I have to write something down. Like, you kind of have to, unless you have a good memory. Because I don't want to give you paper. I want you, when you're done working with me, I want you to have a book that has all the training techniques I taught you, all the questions you had, everything, even the medicine knowledge I'm giving you, all in one book. So at the end of the whole season, you go home with this book. You can review everything. Because I want you to end up being the best that you can be at the end of the whole season, right? So the book always works, always works. I do get pushback from it, but they always write into it. And I always make sure, hey, do you want to have 10 minutes to sit down and write in your book? Some say yes, some say no, which is great. Because the book to me always works. My expectations when it comes to working with me, I'm a pretty chill guy. I'm very approachable. I laugh a lot. So my expectations are of other people are almost where my expectations are, right? But not too much. Because for me, for my own personal self, I have big ones. Other people who are just starting, I want them to sort of come to where I am, and it works out all the time, all the time. So when it comes to communication with my work students, we talk. We talk about, well, not me. They will bring up everything underneath the sun. Because when we're doing work together, I realize that, oh, okay, I get this now especially when it comes to students. When you're working with them and they feel comfortable, they open up. And people open up and they start telling you things that like, oh, did not need to hear this. But okay, I'll bite. Right? So I keep my communication open like that. And when I do that, I realize that more and more people who work with me, they open up even more and even more. And like I said, some days I'm like, yeah, I did not need to hear that. Nope, that's not a farm thing. No, I don't want to hear that. But we talk about it because I realize that a lot of people want to talk. And rice, picking peas and beans. As I told my niece and nephew, when we were picking our beans and harvesting them, and we're harvesting them for eating, and we're snapping them. I said, oh my God, look, it's the original Snapchat that we used to do with my grandmother when we were kids, right? That's what it is. And so when we're harvesting stuff, we'll sit down with all snap beans. People say, I don't have Snapchat. What do you mean? Trust me, you'll start talking, right? So I just make sure that I lead properly and I lead to the best of my ability. Because if I lead to the best of my ability, I realize that draws out the best ability from other people as well. I always do it with a smile and laugh. But for me, I will tell you this right now, I did Second City for 4 years. So I'm always happy and always jolly. That's it for me.
Do you want me to speak on this quickly? Isaac, you want to go?
Where is it? Sorry, my thing's down. Where am I? There you go. Then slide 6, the employee-centered workplaces.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. So it says here, gives us some specific examples of your farm for here, check-ins and meetings and you host. As if you guys heard me say earlier, we have, when my work study students come in at the UTCF farm, we go directly to the medicine wheel. You can come into the farm, you can lollygag with what you want, but before we really start the day, I always say, hey, come to the circle. Come to the circle, let's start this right. So we do that and we sit there, we'll have sometimes a half an hour meeting in that circle and we'll talk about the day before and what I expect that day, right? And once again, people open up and tell you everything. So I make sure that I check in with them throughout the day as well. I'll check with them and pull them aside and say, hey, do you have anything you want to talk to me about with the farm? Or if you're not learning something that you're not really getting a grasp of, but I always make sure I'm there for them. Because one thing I don't want to do, because it has happened to me, is that you get someone you work for and they never check in with you. They say, go do your task, and I'll probably see you at the end of the day. I'm like, wow, don't you want to see how I'm doing? Maybe I'm doing something wrong, right? And I like that. I like being able to check in with my work students, with people I work with. Because I need to see how the day is going for them, right? And I make sure that we stop, we talk, sip some water, maybe pick a strawberry or two, eat some strawberries. Maybe we're just reading some stuff, and we sit there and just talk and check in.
I talked about my morning and afternoon meetings, but we also have kind of a more formal way to discuss things. And you know what? I've been off and on with this procedure, but a lot of or this kind of tool, but you've probably heard of rose thorn bud. And we did this on the farm for a bunch of years, and we haven't done it in a while, but I think it's a good tool. So we describe our check-in as a rose, thorn, and bud. Everybody sort of describes something under each of those. The rose being something positive that's going on at work. And this has to be really work focused. It's not like your life. It's like what's going on at work. So the rose is something positive. The thorn is something that might be poking you a bit, something that might be a little bit irritating. This is a chance for folks to be able to communicate with the bosses, but also one another about things that are going on. And then we also have Bud, which is something that you're looking forward to, or something that's sort of forthcoming that we want to discuss. And that's been a good tool just to get people talking. It's not the be all and end all of communication, certainly, but it's a good tool to get folks talking, especially if we've got folks that are a little bit more closed. It's just to get the convo. And then we added another thing, rose, thorn, bud, and we added weather, like weather as in like precipitation, or as in like wind, like the climate. And that actually speaks to what's happening not on the farm, but might be happening in your own life, that's like influencing your attitude and your performance potentially, like, because we don't know what might be going on in someone's personal life, but if they want to talk about it, then that would be under weather, which is something that's kind of happening, that's kind of not in control maybe, or that's influencing your work anyway. So we added that extra one on there. And then I had some notes here about like a happy team is a productive team. So I'll just quickly say that we try to do fun things as well as work, because like we do work really hard. So we try to have staff lunches. There was a time when we had staff lunches every single day, like somebody cooked lunch every single day for the team. It was like a rotating lunch thing. We don't do that anymore because it got too complicated, because everybody's got different dietary stuff. But that was one thing that we did for a long time. We have like activity days or afternoons off the farm where we go to the beach, or we play mini putt, or we'll take everybody out to do that stuff. And that's like a big expense, because it's paid time, and it's also like an activity that potentially costs money too, but it actually is a good investment and is money well spent. So if it costs me $200 to take some folks out for a meal, or like, I don't know, it's worth it. It's really worth it. And then people still get paid, so they're not feeling like they have to like sacrifice their money. Anyway, something to consider if you can afford it, and if you can fit it into your budget. It really makes a difference. We also celebrate birthdays, so like we'll bake a cake and have ice cream or whatever. And I give my staff free stuff all the time, just to like kind of keep them sweet. Like I don't expect them to give me anything, but they are the ones that work for me. So like especially the staff that work for me year round, I'm like giving them like meat and all the food that we have here on the farm. Eat it, take it, get it away from me. Like enjoy, take everything you want. You can have everything I have. Because like I owe a lot to the folks that work here, because they facilitate me having this life. So like I just want them to have everything. So I'm just like trying to be super generous as much as possible. Obviously there's some limits to that, but that I think that goes a long way, and hopefully your staff will see that like you do the best you can as a small workplace employer. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, for me, I'm giving your staff the veggies to take home and stuff like that is amazing. They love it, especially if you're working with students. They really love it, because they go home with grocery bags of food they don't have to buy at the grocery store. And it's free, it's full of nutrition, and they keep the money in their pockets. And trust me, they come back the next year as well. And I always tell them, are you here to work or for the free groceries? They go, a bit of both. I'm like, perfect, let's work.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. That's the end of our first part of the presentation. So about 13. And we'll start the second part of our session now. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul and Heather from the Many Ways Collective. Paul Wartman is a settler with transplanted European roots who works as a creative community facilitator and farmer in centrally Nova Scotia, legally Gatiq Mi'kmaqi. His facilitation broadly supports deepening relationships and strategic planning, and is informed by agroecological principles, compassionate communication, and belonging. Since 2008, Paul has been facilitating social movements, not-for-profits, schools, unions, community groups, farms, and many more to create action that is people and land-based, cooperative, and restorative. And then we also have Heather Thoma. Heather loves bringing her listening, questions, and caring into groups to support learning, growth, and social change. She works as a community educator, facilitator, and project coordinator in the nonprofit sector, and her years of farming and arts practice bring aliveness, creativity, and patience to her approaches. Take it away, Paul and Heather.
Thanks, Laura and Dave. Super to be here. Thanks everyone for coming to the session and staying for the second half. Even though we had no halftime show, I was thinking when you were describing it before, first half, second half. So that's my suggestion for your next workshop. As Laura mentioned, Paul and I, in addition to both being farming in different contexts, are working with Many Ways Collective. And Many Ways Collective is a collective of facilitators that are supporting organizations and their members to deepen understanding and practice of tools for cultural transformation and social change. And we bring expertise as educators, consultants, activists, farmers, connectors, and storytellers. And most of us have a really strong connection to learning with the land. And so we're really happy to be able to work with National Farmers Union and all of you who have that strong connection to the land and how we can bring all these different pieces together. In addition to Paul and I, we have 4 other folks who have been working with us for the last while. So Hannah Ringlich, who's been part of facilitating this session in the past, Rav Singh, who some of you may know from NFU contexts, and Sri Nalamathu and Marangiz Monsef are also part of the collective. So we're really happy to, be a team. So I'll pass it over to Paul.
Thanks, Heather. And thanks again to Isaac and Marcelle. That was like a balm for the soul, especially after doing a bit of work around migrant farm workers. So a really beautiful session. Thanks for starting us off. I'm going to share my screen and maybe just a thumbs up from people with videos on if that's coming through okay. Thank you. So a brief agenda for our time together today. We're going to go over the purpose and some of the goals that Heather and I brought for this session. We're going to briefly talk about some of the session expectations and just do some acknowledgements. And then we'll be going into the activity, which is 3 wonderful parts that are very complementary to what just happened. There's a lot of how-to from 2 experts. And for us, we're going to be like, how do we do that? So offer some space to practice. And then if there's time at the end, we'll have space for question and answer. And I'll pass it back to Heather.
Okay, I'm just going to stay unmuted so I don't have to remember to unmute every time. So the core of this session is going to be a practice, and we're going to design or describe a farm scenario and think about how that can become more equitable, more filled with care, more the way that Isaac and Marcelle were describing as I was listening to them talk. I was just like, okay, this is really encouraging to hear. So we're going to talk about practical sort of farm level situations of what to do when a challenge occurs. This is going to feel like a really short session, and we're trying to do a lot in the session. So we'll have small pieces, but then we'll offer what you will have already received, I think, right? 3 resource sheets that you can take back to sort of reflect on how to work with this later on your farm. We also offer longer workshops that go way more in depth into these different scenarios. So there's more opportunity if you like what you do here. Okay, Paul.
And for the goals, again, broadly, it's going to be to practice in our context what we just heard about. So specifically, we're going to look to how to increase our awareness and recognize potential problems, conflicts, tensions related to the topics of equity, discrimination, as well as our wellness and stress. We're going to be doing this on the farm level, all with the intention to better understand what is our experience. We're going to reflect on those experiences, and then we're going to think about how we would like to change them. And in response, how to change them to be better, more in solidarity, more in wellness. And then in the package that was sent out to you, as well as a little bit here in the third part of the activity, we're going to talk about how to create a practical procedure to do this either as an individual or as a farm team. And so some of the expectations and acknowledgements that will help us to reach those goals, we just want to acknowledge that everyone's contexts and experiences are unique. Everyone's at a different level of practice and experience with these topics. And so we'll do our best to be kind and open when we're sharing, and also be accountable when we slip and make little mess ups. These topics are complex, and they do take a lot of time for deep reflection, and they require a lot of planning and working through. So there's no one solution fits all that we can kind of hand to you, or vice versa. And because of the timing of this session, we will be moving relatively quickly, and there won't be enough time for deep thought and deep share back, but we'll do our best to create spaces to share both in the chat and verbally with a couple of people. So we'll do our best to share the space. And then for perhaps all of us, some of these topics can be emotionally triggering in multiple ways. So please take care of yourselves, and we'll do our best to support the space and support each other. And then throughout our fun time together, clarifying questions to help with participation are definitely welcome. But any larger or more complex questions, feel free to pop those in the chat or hold them for afterwards. And I'll share all that in the chat as well, so you can review it. And I'll pass it on to Heather.
Awesome. Thank you. So when we were developing this session, being aware of that it was going to be a team process with Marcelle and Isaac at the beginning, we were thinking through, okay, what are the different aspects of relationships basically on a farm, and how can that be communicated? And so as it says on the slide here, we were thinking about it in 4 different ways. So the policies that were being spoken about on one level earlier are the written rules that take your values and your intentions and your mission for your farm and turn it into how are you actually going to write that down for governance for your team. And then procedures are sometimes written, sometimes not written, but that's more the operational that, again, both Marcelle and Isaac were talking about. How are we actually going to do things? How are tasks going to happen? But also, if certain situations arise, how are we going to respond to them? And again, procedures as much as possible can be written down. And then the processes, that's the doing, right? That's what's going to go on between people. And in the moment. And then the culture is how all of that comes together. And I think there was great examples from Marcelle and Isaac about culture, about going to the medicine garden, about doing things together as a team, so it's really, we're looking at these 4 different levels. And that's a way that you can think about it when you're trying to put together different tools basically for yourself and for your team members. And so if something goes wrong on the farm, what we hope is that your culture that you've created, the processes that you've developed, or the procedures are going to help, right? There's something going to come up and you're going to be able to solve it on the ground in that way because you have all of those different perspectives and tools to support you. But if it doesn't remedy it, then that's where policy comes in. So that's there as a protection, as something that everybody can go back to, as a written document or something that's been agreed to and understood from the beginning. And so I don't know if you guys spoke about this a little bit, but one of the things that we often think about is just you want to make sure that you're going to review that policy and reflect on it on a regular basis. So maybe that's every year, maybe that's every 2 years, maybe it's halfway through the season to check in and say, okay, does this really make sense, what we've written down in this policy? So just kind of thinking about making sure that it's still true, right? That it's still serving you. And then beyond your farm policy, you also then have, if you need it, depending on the situation, municipal policies, provincial policies, federal policies, like we were talking about the probationary period. That's something that happens at a farm level, but it's also at a provincial level. So you have this whole nested collection of things that will help you. And so for today, for this scenario, we're looking at the farm level interpersonal scale, what people can do on the farm to just really, as much as possible, improve the well-being and deepen the equity on the farm. So we're talking about the culture level and the process level. And so now we're going to share an example of a challenging scenario, and that will help us think through, okay, what kind of policies might we need if we have these challenging scenarios coming up? Go ahead, Paul.
And before we dive into it, we'll share a little piece of art that Hannah Renglick put into these slides. She's always with us. And so this is art by Molly Costello, and with the words in the web saying, practice makes patterns, creates culture, weaves new worlds. Thanks to Molly Costello and Hannah for that. So for this scenario, I'll just back up for a minute from this slide. I bring a lot of my experience as a farm worker. The past 10 years, or for 10 years, I worked as a farm worker. And now with my partner and family, we own our own farm without any staff. So that's kind of the angle I'm bringing towards this. And this story encapsulates many different experiences from what I lived through. And we tried to word it in a way that it was gentle as possible, but still containing a number of power imbalances and different power dynamics that will give us material to work with in terms of observing and reflecting and sharing back on the topics of discrimination, lack of wellness, or inequity. So a bit of a content warning that there's going to be a story that contains some things that you may be able to relate to, and just a reminder to take care of each other. And if it helps, feel free to sit back, close your eyes and listen, or to soften your gaze as I share a story. It's a snowy morning, and the farm team is meeting for the weekly meeting. The farm lead is late, and one farmhand hasn't arrived either, leaving two farmhands standing around for 20 minutes. One takes out her phone to catch up on reading the orientation booklet, which starts with an anti-discrimination statement. The farm lead arrives, apologizes for being late, and says an ageist put-down about the farmhand who hasn't shown up yet. The others shuffle uncomfortably. The farm lead gets to business, telling the farmhands what to do for the day and saying that the weekly meeting will happen tomorrow, just like they said yesterday. While explaining the tasks, the farm lead makes a comment based on gender stereotypes and laughs while physically pushing the closest farmhand, who chuckles uncomfortably. At the end of the meeting, the farm lead says, "Sounds good? Good. I'll be inside, busy working. See you at day's end." Everyone takes their leave. The farmhand who was late shows up with a sore back and asks what he missed. Once caught up by the other farmhands, he makes a race-based insult towards the farm lead under his breath and complains about the lack of personal protection equipment. The farmhands work away in the field, working way past lunch without a break. The end. Feel free to open your eyes if they were closed, and maybe feel your feet on the ground or your bum on the chair, and come back to us. So for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to invite you to reflect on what you just heard and what you can see or return to on the screen. And just as a quick brainstorm, feeling free to put as many things in the chat as you want to. Pick one aspect or two, or again, as many as you want. from that scenario that stood out to you. What was the most stressful? What was the most unwell? What was inequitable about that or discriminatory? And try to be as specific as possible. What was the setting like? What were the words said? What were the actions taken? So I'll put that question in the chat if you'd like to review it. And again, everyone's welcome to write their thoughts in the chat, and we'll just spend a couple of minutes on this. If there are any questions that you'd like to ask now for clarification, you're welcome to. If you need any examples, the scenario's in front of you, full of them. But I'll be quiet for the next 2 minutes.
Paul, did you put the scenario on the screen?
Is it not right now?
Oh, okay, I can't see it for some reason. Okay, great. Sorry. Thanks.
So just 30 seconds left to add any reflections from that scenario that stood out to you into the chat. Okay. Feel free to keep putting those things as they come up into the chat, and I'll pass it over to Heather.
So just a reflection. I know when Isaac was speaking, it was great to hear. He said, you know, be aware of how you're feeling about things, be aware of what's going on for yourself as a leader when you're in a team environment. And so that's one of the things we wanted to really pay attention to and ask you to reflect on as you were thinking about these different things that have been named in the chat. And as you listened to that, how do you know when something is unwell? Like what are the messages that you get? How does that express itself for you? Because it's different for everyone, right? So that's something that I think is really important to reflect on, and I'm happy to have people share some responses either verbally or in the chat. Like what do you notice? How do you know if something is not right? And that may be physical, it may be intellectual, it may be knowledge that you have. So what can people just share a bit about? How do you know what you know? Any comments or experiences either, and it doesn't even have to be from this example. It could be from another example that you have, that you don't need to name the example, but just name the feeling, or name what happened for you. So the shuffling uncomfortably that was named in that scenario is one of those examples. Yep. A feeling or an intuition that's just a hunch. Maybe something that you've read, like you've read a policy, or you've heard stories or examples from other situations that you're sort of comparing to. So we don't have to go into lots of them, but just really wanted to name and encourage that, right? Yeah, if someone who's normally talkative is not talkative, so just keeping an eye on people, like Marcelle was saying, let's just hang back, right? For the people who maybe don't want to talk in a whole group, how do you give different types of environments, vocal cues? Yep. Great. There we go. Super. So yeah, just whether you're a worker or an employer, because in this group today, we have probably a mix of all kinds of folks who have all kinds of roles on the farm. And so the idea of leadership, like the people who have the title of certain leaders are leaders, but also anyone in a group who, no matter what your title is, can carry an energy or a perspective and really be a leader in a group by modeling, right? So the more self-aware we can all be, the more efficient our teams can be, but the more aligned, the more harmonious, right? The more well-being can come into the scenario. Cool. So yeah, just inviting you to reflect. Okay, so now Paul's going to take us into the next phase of the story.
Thanks, Heather. And thanks everyone for taking a moment to go into that uncomfortable place, which can also be hard to share sometimes, hard to connect with those things and hard to speak to them. So thanks for taking the time to practice that. Part 2 of this activity, and welcome, Rav. Nice to see you here. Part 2 is to do what Marcelle was starting to do in the comments, and perhaps where a lot of us turn to automatically when these things happen, but it's to envision a better scenario. And so coming from part 1, where we practiced identifying the issues in the farm scenario, we are now going to shift into a chance to envision that better scenario. So as individuals, take a moment to reflect on the example from part 1 and give yourself the permission to imagine if things were significantly improved. If equity was 100%, if solidarity with your fellow workers and your employers was 100%, if your wellness was fulfilled, if you were nourished, if everything was 100%. Walk yourself through the scene from part 1 and think of 1 or 2 of these aspects, but try to really dial in, so just a couple. And what would be different in those interactions from part 1 to part 2? And you can take this from the perspective of the farm lead, if that's helpful for you, or one of the farm hands, if that's helpful. I'm just going to give you 3 minutes to be with the quiet and to think about how would it be different? What would it look like? Get nice and specific and nitty gritty. Nice. And as you can see, people are putting that into the chat. So feel free to answer in the chat what stood out to you the most in this better context. What was different? How was it different? What did well-being look like? How did equity show up, etc.? So a couple more minutes just to flow those results into the chat if you want. Maybe just 30 more seconds to get any remaining thoughts in the chat. And perhaps because we have time, would anyone like to speak to what they wrote down? Or if you haven't written anything down, did you want to speak to it? I can speak to a couple then, just in case people are listening in the background. But Dave writes, in this better context, one or more of the team would have spoken up about the various discriminatory statements and been backed up by the rest. Kaylee writes, the farm lead could give the farmhands a heads up that they're running late, a task to do in the meantime, and then kick off the meeting once they arrive. And they could also have time set aside after the meeting for any stragglers who would provide the opportunity for the employee with a sore back to let them know. Laura writes, clear and constant communication that is encouraged from both ways. Farm workers feel safe to voice discomfort and disorganization, and farm lead feels responsible to make space for planning and checking in. Marcelle writes, ideally no one is late. Discriminatory comments are not said. Tasks are delegated and each person has a clear idea of what's happening for the day or week. Each person has a chance to ask for anything they need, and the farm lead meets with the latecomer privately to discuss the sore back and reasons for being late. And there's a couple more in the chat there. And thanks for, again, thinking about this and doing the practice in person, which will help you to create policies and procedures for your farm, which is what we're going to move into in just a little bit. But I just want to say this is one way to go about things in life. You know, if you happen to be sitting with an issue, you can take a moment to imagine what would feel better in this situation. And then Heather's going to walk us through an activity to help us know when things are better. I'll pass it over to Heather.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring you back to your own awareness again, to your own body somatic experience, and just ask this same question that we asked in the first scenario. So how do you know? What happens? What does it feel like when it feels better? And so just sit with that question for a minute when you read the descriptions and listen to what folks said in the redesigned situation. What do you experience? How would you describe that? And you can just think about it in your own words initially. And I'll give you a minute to just sit with that. And again, really just sink in to what's going on when you put yourself into that better scenario. And then I'm just going to refer you to the handout, which you may or may not have now, but you'll be able to look at after the session. And the first page of that scenario is a reflection process. We call it a wellness process. And it's a little series of steps to think about what is the experience that's come up that's been challenging. And again, what are the feelings and the thoughts that you're having, and just becoming more aware of those and realizing that those are connected to needs that there are universal needs that we all have, and we can acknowledge those as a team on a farm, as a group, and really think about how we can notice them and articulate them. Because once we know what they are, then we can think about how to respond to them. And that's the strategies, that's changing our processes on the farm, changing our communication patterns, or setting up policies. So I encourage you after the session to just take a look at that handout, and it gives you a practice that you can work with, like we've been doing here, that you can take to sort of think through with your teams on your farms. But it really does entail having to practice paying attention inwardly and outwardly to what's going on, and acknowledging that that takes time. And as a manager, as a team leader, we're trying to be as productive as we can, and we're getting paid by the piece and by the bunch of the beats. But really, again, as Isaac and Marcelle both said, taking time and investing time into these reflections and these conversations and this communication is going to help in the long run for things to be more productive. And it's just different things that we don't always practice. And so it's really great to have these types of workshops to be able to bring up all of these different things. Yes, there are the written policies, and yes, there's the training, and yes, there are the contracts, and there's the interpersonal conversations. So yeah, just really encouraging you to keep thinking about all these things. And so no matter what we try to do, we're going to continue to practice, and we're going to continue to think about what the possibilities are for redesigning and improving. And no matter how much we do that, there will always still be conflicts. There will always still be miscommunications. It's just a part of what happens when you have a group of people together on a team in the hot sun, working long hours. It's just going to happen. So I think that's the other piece, is don't take it personally yourself. Like, just take it personally enough to learn, and then do your best. As Marcelle said, we're not going to be the best. We're going to do our best. And if we all can hold each other in that context, then we can really just, keep continuing to practice and have as many tools as we can. So Paul's going to talk a little bit about the tools now.
And again, because we have time, Heather and I weren't sure if there would be enough time to share this tool with everybody that I'm sharing on the screen right now. And sorry, way back, we didn't explain that you can press escape to get out of full screen share if you feel trapped in at any point. And if you want to see the chat where we're posting a lot of these questions, there's just a little button at the bottom of Zoom where it says chat with 2 thought bubbles. You can click on those to see some of the prompts we've been putting in there. But so far, what we've been practicing are kind of these first 2 bubbles. Identify the experience or issue that wants attention. So you can pick this scenario that just happened this morning, or if something's coming up from you from a year ago, it's still okay to identify that and sit with it for a minute and move on to the second bubble, which is notice feelings and thoughts that arise from experience. So this is what Heather has been leading us through in part 1 and part 2, right? We've identified things, and then we recognize, how do we notice where we're feeling these things, either tension in our actual physical body, thoughts that arise in our mind. And to support this process, the nonviolent communication, there's a Center for Nonviolent Communication, which is where these lists of feelings and needs are coming from. And this sometimes helps people to be like, oh yeah, I do feel affectionate and calm when I think about starting the day in the medicine circle and being able to speak with Isaac. And I do feel tender and thrilled knowing what my role is and that I can still come to Marcelle for support. Right. So it sometimes helps to have this emotional literacy to be like, oh, this is what I'm feeling, and this in my body is what it feels like when I think about it. So what we're going to move to now, because we've done the identified the experience and kind of the harsh scenario, and we've noticed the feelings, and then we've gone to the better scenario in part 2, and we've identified that experience and we've noticed how we're feeling. So now we're going to talk about the strategy piece. We're going to kind of skip over the needs that are being signaled. But we're going to talk about creating that strategy. And I'm just going to switch my screen for a minute here. Can I see a thumbs up if the scenario scene is being shown again? Thank you. Okay. So my ducks in a row here. These are different kinds of tools for transformation. And again, there is no one policy or procedure or process that we can just hand to you or copy and paste. So these policies on your end need to be actionable, they need to be relevant and in response to your context. And so these topics are in many ways evolving circumstances, external and internal inputs, and they require that relationship, and hence the need for an ongoing living practice. Because again, we can share these tools and policies with you, but if you don't take time to practice them, they won't be living with you. So I'll pass it over to Heather to speak about different types of strategies that exist.
Yeah. So as the slide says there's there's all different ways that people could think about this and sort of categorize them, but one of the ways that we've been thinking about it is the preventative. So those are the things, policies that can be put in place, things that can be learned about, things that can be practiced before the farming even starts. And again, in the first part of this session, right, Marcelle and Isaac were talking about that. What do you do ahead of time? How do you meet your team online before you even meet in person to build those relationships? Taking workshops or trainings. And also preventative is once you have a policy, put it on your website so people can see it before they even come to the farm, right? If they have a question about how you work, there's things that they'll already know about you before they even get there. Responsive is in those moments, like we were just describing in a scenario, what can you do if things are tense and if there is a conflict? So if you know you have to have a difficult conversation with an employer or with a coworker, you could bring someone you trust that helps you feel grounded and feel like you can be your best self to come into that situation. You can practice, again, if you're in that situation, practice this noticing, practice that awareness of what's going on for yourself. So different kinds of things that can happen in the moment. And then what's more of a reconciliatory or a healing process that happens after the fact? What are those kinds of policies or practices? And so if employees are aware that they have the ability to access mental health resources, to access physiotherapy if they have an injury. So what are the types of things like that, okay, something has happened, we can't undo it. How can we move forward knowing that people can feel supported as they go forward after something has happened? So there's really, if we think about it in this chronological way, there's sort of those 3 phases. Yeah. So now we'll sort of reflect back again to our scenario. I'll take it from there.
So it's going to speak to, unless Marcelle, did you want to speak to what you just wrote in the chat? No? Are you okay if I speak it out in case people, cool. So in the chat, Marcelle's saying, I borrowed strategies, policies from previous workplaces and adapted them to my farm. Amazing. It was really helpful to have worked in several different types of employment as an employee before I became an employer. Thank you for sharing that, Marcelle. And so that's a great example of one way to create strategies. And what we were going to do is invite you to think on the spot of a strategy that can get you from part one, harsh, unwell scenario, to part two, more equitable, more well scenario. And again, because we have the time and these resources, I'm just going to go a little bit through our 3-page handout that we've sent to Lara and Dave to send out to you folks. So this is a process again that talks about identifying the experience, noticing your feelings and thoughts, identifying needs that are being signaled by those feelings. For example, the need for protection if your back is physically sore. And then when you have those pieces of the puzzle, if you can identify or make a guess at the needs that are being signaled, then you can create a strategy or select a strategy and in order to meet those needs. And so, as Marcelle was saying, like, I've collected a bunch of strategies from the places that I've worked, which is awesome. But for some of us, we don't have those experiences yet, which is why we come to awesome workshops like this. And so the Many Ways Collective has put together these great resource and policy examples for everybody. So if you have no clue about how to have a meeting or how to develop a policy handbook, there are resources out there for you. And we've just kind of collected them for you in a bit of a literature review. So again, we've broken them down a little bit into preventative, responsive, and reconciliatory or healing. And so you can see some examples there and some links that give you more resources. And then down below, there are some more policy-based things. And it's nice, I think, to talk about policy, especially as NFU members or potential NFU members, for those of you that maybe aren't. It's Membership Drive Month, so check us out. But when we talk about policy, it can help because instead of going as an individual and feeling like all the power you have as an individual, or maybe your friends, you can say, oh, wait, like the United Nations has a Declaration on Human Rights. And you can say, look, like people all over the world are striving towards these standards. Or you can go to Ontario's Agricultural Employees and Employment Standards Act and be like, oh, this has been thought about already to a certain degree. And I can go in there and find resources and copy some of this stuff and adapt what feels good for my situation. And again, you can look at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other Rural Peoples. And this is something that was inspired by La Via Campesina, which National Farmers Union is a member of. And you can see what people similar to us all over the world have created in terms of policy. On the third and final page, which by no means is exhaustive, there's lots of work out there. There's plenty of resources for being in solidarity with migrant farm workers, knowing that the broader system doesn't always support farms to be in good relationships for migrant workers. And there's a bunch of supports for people in terms of their skill development, in terms of parental benefits and other things that you as a farm may not be able to provide to your workers. In moments of need, when the cultural practices on your farm haven't worked out, you can try to find a free legal clinic in Ontario. And then there's a bunch of other tools and resources to continue your education around equity, anti-racism, belonging on your farm. So feel free to look through these if you're like, I want to increase equity, but I don't really know how to. And I didn't pick it up in that 45-minute workshop. So that's what this is for. Just gonna pause. Cool. So that is a bit of the preamble for me to reshare my other screen.
Maybe I'm just going to say a couple things while you're doing that.
Please.
I'm just a couple other things are coming to mind that we can add to our to our list for next year. I'm just thinking about OntarioNewFarmer.ca is a resource page that has some of these types of things on it as well. And Farms at Work is a farm education organization that I also work part-time for. And we have a resource page there also that has, if you're setting up a farm business, and it has a lot of the different policy types of tools there as well. So we can put those in the chat or put them on the resource page. And just another note that when I was reviewing the resource page, I didn't look quite closely enough. So the page that you received at 4 o'clock this afternoon, or whenever Dave sent it out, there are a couple of those links that don't actually work. So at the end of the session, they are going to resend the resources and they will be fully functioning. So that's a little lesson and a reminder for me. Check 3 times before you send something out. Okay. Good. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Heather. Heather's taking the responsibility there, but it was us that missed those links. So thank you, Heather, for your sharp eyes. So coming back to the activity, we've read the scenario in its harsh form. We've visioned the better situation. And so the next invitation is to take a couple of minutes to reflect on one or more strategies that you think would be helpful to transition from scenario 1 to the better scenario 2. And it's hard to share both screens at once with the policy supports, but this is a chance for you to dig into your collective memory about what you've done in the past, which I know you all have great experience in. So any questions before I give you just 2 minutes of quiet thought? Okay, power to you. I'll bring you back in 2 minutes. Well, thanks for taking a couple of minutes to begin doing that challenging work of thinking about how to move from harm to healing or responsive or even preemptive or preventative work and strategies. If you want to add those reflections in the chat, you're more than welcome to, and otherwise I'll pass it over to Heather.
Yeah. So I'm just inviting more share back, right? Am I missing a section? That's where we are. Yeah. So I think just if people want to share out loud even, but definitely feel free to put things in the chat. But if there's thoughts that you have, and I guess the other thing I was wondering about is what policies do people already have? Like, our folks who are here, are you already an employer? Do you have some policies in place? What are things that you're listening to all this and you're thinking, all right, I got that. I did that already. Okay, this is good. Or are you realizing, oh, okay, this is really what I realize I want to focus on for this year before the season starts? Like, I'm just curious, where are people at in terms of all of this that we've been sharing? If anybody wants to either put that in the chat or just unmute and say a little bit out loud, we'd love to hear your voice.